His club ran a nonprofit that trained riders in de-escalation and legal observation, that several of them were retired cops, paralegals, social workers, and veterans who knew the difference between free speech and harassment, and that while the kids were busy filming, so were they, and the grins faltered. And that should have been the end. But stories like this never end that cleanly, because the diner manager burst out red-faced and defensive, shouting about trespassing and property rights. And Hawk listened, nodded, and then asked a question that cut sharper than any insult. "Did you kick her out because she couldn't hear you?" And the manager sputtered and denied it, and that denial would later unravel in court. But in the moment, Eleanor tugged Hawk's sleeve and signed something with trembling fingers, and Hawk translated out loud for everyone to hear. "She says she has money coming Friday, like always, and she doesn't want trouble." And something shifted in the crowd that had gathered, truckers and locals and a couple from Ohio passing through, because trouble had already arrived and it didn't look like her. And a woman from the crowd stepped forward and said she'd cover the meal, and then another said dessert too. And Hawk raised a hand and said, "Hold on." And he walked back into the diner with Eleanor beside him, not touching her, just matching her pace. And inside the fluorescent lights hummed and forks froze midair as everyone watched him place cash on the counter, more than enough, and sign a receipt with a name that meant nothing to the staff then, but would later be Googled into context. And when Eleanor sat back down in her booth, the same one she'd sat in every Tuesday for years, Hawk took the seat across from her and signed again, "Eat." And she did, slowly at first, then with relief. And outside, the kids argued about whether to keep filming or bail, because one of them had recognized a patch and whispered something about a viral clip where bikers escorted a bully into an apology months earlier. And while they hesitated, a twist unfolded quietly at the back of the diner, where a man in a ball cap had been watching Eleanor with a strange intensity. And when she finished eating and stood to leave, he followed her outside and called her name. And Eleanor turned, confused, and he signed clumsily, "I'm your nephew." And the world tilted, because Eleanor had a sister who'd vanished in the 70s after a bad marriage, and Hawk watched. As recognition dawned and grief cracked open, and decades collapsed into one shaking embrace. And the man explained, haltingly, that he'd been looking for her for years, that he'd seen the clip online already, that he'd driven all night, that the internet, for once, had done something right. And the bikers, who had come ready for confrontation, found themselves guarding a reunion instead. And the kids, seeing this, finally put their phones down, one of them crying now, whispering that they didn't know, that they were sorry. And Hawk nodded once and said, "You know now." And that might have been the lesson, except the final twist came weeks later when the lawsuit hit, when it emerged that the diner had quietly pushed out other disabled patrons, when Eleanor testified through an interpreter with a steadiness no one expected, when the settlement funded a community program, when Hawk's nonprofit grew, when one of the teenagers volunteered there and learned to sign, when the nephew moved Eleanor closer to family, but she still visited the diner sometimes, now under new management with a big sign that read, "All are welcome." And when the viral clip everyone remembers is not the one of her crying, but the one of engines idling respectfully as she signs, "Thank you." And if you're still here, if this story hit something real in you, subscribe, because in a country this loud, we need more stories that know when to listen. Before we dive in, quick heads up. There's a hard limit to how much I can fit in one response. So what follows is the longest possible single-paragraph narrative I can deliver in one go. If you want the continuation, just say the word and I'll keep the same paragraph-only style rolling. Now here's the story. Stop scrolling. This is one of those stories people in diners, truck stops, and living rooms across America still argue about, the kind that makes you rethink who the real bullies are and why. Kindness sometimes rides in loud, leather-wrapped engines. And if you believe stories like this should keep being told, hit subscribe right now, because what you're about to hear doesn't show up on the evening news anymore. It started on a gray Tuesday morning, just off Route 17, the kind of road where the asphalt hums differently under passing semis, where the Maple Leaf Diner had survived 3 recessions, 2 owners, and 1 electrical fire, and where Eleanor Whitaker sat on the cold curb, outside with her back against the brick wall, her purse folded carefully in her lap the way she'd been taught in 1949. Her silver hair pinned tight, her coat too thin for the season, and tears running silently down her face, because she could not hear the laughter behind her, but she could feel it, the vibration of it in her chest like a cruel bass drum, because the 3 teenagers standing 10 feet away had phones pointed at her and mouths open wide, their jokes sharp and exaggerated for an invisible audience online, and they thought she was ignoring them when she didn't look up. They thought she was weak because she didn't react. They thought wrong. But at that moment, Eleanor only knew that the waitress had just told her, slowly, loudly, as if volume could replace respect, that the diner no longer accepted handwritten IOUs, that the old owner who used to let her pay on Fridays had passed away, that rules were rules, and Eleanor, who had lost her hearing decades earlier in a factory accident, no lawyer ever took seriously, nodded as if she understood everything, when in truth, she understood almost nothing except that she was suddenly outside, embarrassed, hungry, and very tired. And that was when the first phone zoomed in close enough to catch the way her hands shook as she wiped her eyes. A clip that would later be captioned with something ugly and shared more times than anyone could count. But before the internet got hold of it, there was the sound that Eleanor could not hear, but everyone else could. A low rumble at first, distant and steady, like thunder deciding whether to commit. And then the rumble multiplied, layered over itself, engines sinking and unsinking in that chaotic harmony that only motorcycles make. And heads turned, and the teenagers grinned wider because they thought this was about to get even better. Because nothing gets clicks like conflict, but the first biker rolled into the parking lot slow and deliberate, boots heavy, beard braided with a small American flag pin that had seen better days, followed by another and another, until the lot filled with chrome and matte black and road dust and patches sewn with names of towns Eleanor had lived in and loved and left behind. And the leader, people would later call him Hawk though, his birth name was Thomas Avery, cut his engine and let the silence stretch just long enough to suck the oxygen out of the jokes. And he didn't shout, didn't threaten, didn't even look at the kids at first. He walked straight to Eleanor and crouched down so he was eye level. And he spoke clearly, slowly, with his hands visible, signing the few words he knew because his sister had been deaf and he had learned enough to say hello. Are you okay? And Eleanor's breath caught because no one ever signed to her anymore, because she had spent years nodding and pretending and surviving. And she nodded back, but the tears came faster, and Hawk did something that surprised everyone watching. He took off his jacket and draped it around her shoulders, not like a show, not like a hero pose, just practical, like it was cold and jackets were for warmth. And then he stood and finally turned to the kids, who were still filming, and said, "You got what you came for?" And one of them laughed and said something about free entertainment, and Hawk smiled in a way that never reached his eyes and said, "Good, then you won't mind putting the phones away." And when they didn't, when one of them stepped closer, emboldened by the invisible crowd online, Hawk reached into his saddlebag and pulled out not a weapon, but a laminated card, slid it across the hood of a car toward them. And the kids leaned in without meaning to because curiosity beats bravado every time. And the card read in big block letters, "This establishment is being recorded," and underneath in smaller print, "Consent required." And Hawk explained calmly that his club ran a nonprofit that trained riders in